I'm Jennifer Prigge, Senior Vice President of Business Development, and I'm thrilled to have you all joining us for our 2026 Drug Pipeline Insider session. At TrueRx, we believe in helping employers and patients navigate the changing world of pharmacy benefits with clarity and confidence. Today, we're taking a forward-looking view, cutting through the hype on what's really coming next in the drug pipeline and what those changes mean for spend, access, and patient outcomes. So our topic today is the 2026 drug pipeline. You've likely seen the headlines: breakthrough GLP-1 medications, emerging gene therapies, and a wave of biosimilars promising meaningful savings. Yet, as these innovations emerge, U.S. employers are contending with the sharpest rise in health insurance costs in 15 years, with premiums projected to climb 10% in 2026. In response, 61% of employers, according to the latest Managed Healthcare Executive Survey, are exploring new, more transparent pharmacy benefit strategies to help manage these escalating costs. All right, well, before we dive in, I also want to acknowledge that we're navigating a shifting regulatory landscape. Our health strategists are closely monitoring President Trump's May 2025 executive order on most favored nations pricing and other policy changes that may impact your plans. We're here to help you navigate not just the pipeline, but the broader environment. That's part of our true experience: proactive support, transparency, and focus on outcomes, especially during these times of change. So today, the real question is, which of these developments will have the biggest impact on your organization, and how can we help you prepare now? That's what we'd like to unpack together. So what we're going to do is we'll have a Q&A panel to submit your questions. We'll actively be monitoring throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to address as we go through our discussion and during this main event. We'll also set aside time at the end for a dedicated Q&A, so please feel free to keep the questions coming. All right, let's move on to introductions. We're fortunate enough to have three outstanding, amazing pharmacists with us today. Each of them bring a unique perspective from their corner of the industry. I'd love to briefly introduce them, and then we'll jump into our discussion. All right, first would be Daniel Wilson. He is our VP of Clinical Operations at TrueRx, and he leads our clinical services and specializes in strategies to manage costs and improve patient health. He is just a wealth of knowledge, and we're just so lucky to have him here. Next, we're joined by Lee Feigart, VP of Clinical Health Strategy at TrueRx. He supports our business development team, and he is passionate about advising clients on benefit design, formulary strategy, and helping balance that innovation with affordability. And last but not least, we're welcoming Kelly Primich. She is the co-founder and vice president of clinical strategy at Foundational Pharmacy Strategies. Kelly, I'd love to give you just a moment to provide some more information about your role at FPS.
Well, thank you, Jenny, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for your attendance today. We're really excited for this impactful discussion. At Foundational Pharmacy Strategies, we're proud to be part of a larger family, Macro Health. Macro Health is focused on healthcare ecosystem with data-driven insights to optimize and connect the marketplace.
Thank you, Kelly. That's wonderful. So let's jump in. Let's start by framing the big picture. We've obviously heard a lot of buzz about how 2026 could be a transformational year for the drug pipeline, both in terms of innovation, cost pressure. So Daniel, can you give us just a quick overview of what you're seeing at the macro level?
Absolutely. The 2026 pipeline really stands out for its scale and impact, and there are a few key themes that are emerging. Specialty dominance, this is not a new story. The last several years, specialty has been very prevalent in the FDA approvals, and it seems to be the case again for 2026 with more than 80% of the expected drug approvals to fall in the specialty category, and about 40% targeting rare orphan conditions. Gene therapy continues to be a bigger and bigger area to take note of. The FDA is currently tracking over 120 active gene therapy studies now. Not all of those will get to market, but it does represent a growing pipeline in this area. There's actually potentially 4 approvals that we might expect in the next 6 months for rare genetic disorders. On everyone's mind is GLP-1s. The expansion of GLP-1s and broadening these medications to indications beyond the historical diabetes or weight loss categories. We're seeing more and more in the cardiovascular space, like peripheral artery disease, heart failure, and other indications as well that can significantly expand patient eligibility. Biosimilars are also more and more of those are emerging, which is an exciting opportunity for more cost control. We're seeing new entrants across the high impact categories like osteoporosis, eye disease, and asthma. That really opens the door for more competition in the market to drive down costs for these important biological treatments. Now, I have to say everything we talked about today, like Jenny mentioned, there's a big caveat that we are in the midst of a complex political landscape. We just emerged from the longest government shutdown in history with no guarantee that we won't be in the same place again soon. And this has direct impact on the speed and number of drugs that the FDA may be able to approve in 2026. Likewise, just yesterday, a new director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA was appointed. Now, it's unclear what impact that might have, if any, to the drug pipeline, but it is clear that we're in a very fluid time as it relates to the development and access of drugs in 2026.
Daniel, that's a great overview. Just thinking about it and diving deeper into the GLP-1 space, cardiovascular health is becoming one of the fastest moving categories. We're seeing several GLP-1 therapies expand their indications to include the cardiovascular outcomes. Lee, I want to start with you. How do you feel that's a significant shift for employers?
So these label expansions may significantly broaden eligible populations, depending on the circumstances around coverage. For example, Mounjaro may obtain an indication for cardiovascular risk reduction. It appears at this time that will only be in patients who already have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So plans should ensure that their PBM is leveraging stringent prior authorization criteria when new indications are approved by the FDA. This just ensures patients who are appropriate for treatment are identified, but does not open the floodgates to everyone.
All right. So, Daniel, from your clinical perspective, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, as Lee mentioned, Mounjaro's cardiovascular risk reduction is only for patients that already have diabetes. So that doesn't really expand the eligible population for that drug very much. Likewise, Ozempic is being studied for peripheral artery disease. And that condition in combination with diabetes is one of the leading causes of a need for amputation. So that's a big clinical advantage, but doesn't really expand the population much because, again, this is for diabetic patients. What it does do is it further cements GLP-1s are emerging from just these two categories of diabetes or weight loss, and they're becoming a foundation in chronic care and other conditions as well. Now, there are other GLP-1s that are emerging with various cardiovascular benefits that do expand the potential patient population that could be eligible from a clinical standpoint. We saw in 2024 Wegovy was approved to reduce major cardiovascular events like heart attack and stroke in patients with certain cardiovascular diseases. It's also now being evaluated for patients with heart failure. Now, while having obesity is one factor of being eligible for the drug when it comes to treating these conditions, the new indications that are coming out are for heart disease outcomes. So as GLP-1 indications continue to grow outside of the diabetes and weight loss segments, it's important that PBMs enact stringent PA criteria, really looking at the patient's condition and how does that match the population that was studied. Why does that matter? Well, we want to make sure that the right patients are approved for the medications and it's not just an open door for anyone, so that the patients who would get clinical benefit based on the clinical studies are the ones who are eligible for the drug.
Very smart, Daniel. Kelly, you're working directly with these employers every single day. What are your thoughts on managing weight management into heart health?
Absolutely. There's a lot of curiosity if these are truly miracle drugs that we're experiencing, but countered with a lot of caution. Employers want to be supportive, especially if it's preventative care, but they're aware of the cost exposures. So many are leaning on TrueRx to model the impact and provide recommendations for their workforce. And as Daniel and Lee just mentioned, really ensuring that prior authorization is reflective of what has been studied to ensure it's safe, effective, and financially responsible.
Great, thank you, Kelly. All right, another category within the GLP-1 space would be weight management, still one of the most talked about in this space. We're likely to see oral options for chronic weight management by next year. Daniel, can you touch on the headline here?
Yeah. Thus far, GLP-1s for weight management have just been injectables. And we are seeing some studies coming that show oral semaglutide, which is the GLP-1 that is semaglutide is under the brand names Ozempic, Wegovy, and Rybelsus. Rybelsus is that oral form that we see now, which is used for diabetes. It is being studied for weight management as well. There's also a brand new entity, or orforglipron, that is not yet been released to the market, but it is being studied for weight loss as well as diabetes. And those studies are still emerging, but it does appear that there may be stronger efficacy in weight loss than even oral semaglutide, but might have the trade-off of more side effects as well. And while there haven't been the head-to-head trials, the weight loss seen with this medication compared to the injectable GLP-1s isn't quite as much, but at the end of the day, it is nice to have more options.
Very true. And Kelly, again, what are you hearing from employers on this?
Demand is high, especially from employees that are familiar with GLP-1 drugs. And so we know in today's market, employees are making employment decisions based on benefit coverage. And this has become a hot topic for recruitment and retention. So employers are refining communication to set realistic expectations. And I think we also have to keep in mind that there's a 64.8% discontinuation rate within the first 12 months for those newest injectables. And so a comprehensive support plan is recommended to ensure patients are successful on their weight management journey.
Absolutely, Kelly. And Lee, I know you're going to talk about some of those solutions, but what are your thoughts overall on the payer side?
So plans should be reviewing their cost control strategies now, including utilization management criteria such as step therapy and prior authorization. Call out also a coordination between pharmacy and medical benefits is critical to prevent any coverage overlap. We hope employers have a partner with tailored clinical solutions around these highly utilized agents, such as the TrueRx True Outcomes Weight Management Program. So this is a solution that pairs medication with personalized lifestyle and behavioral support to achieve long-term results. Patients enrolled in this program achieved up to a 15% average weight loss at 6 months, and 90% of those patients engaged in monthly one-on-one virtual visits with a dietitian or pharmacist. As Kelly called out, this medication class has a high discontinuation rate, a lot of times based on side effects. So at the end of the day, we want to help our partners change healthcare costs into healthcare investments.
I agree, Lee. And we've seen such a tremendous uptick in our True Outcomes program based on the statistics that we've had. Daniel has a lot of oversight with our program, and we're just really excited about the offering to the market for True Outcomes. So now thinking about diabetes, Daniel, you mentioned that oral GLP-1. Again, I am not going to try to pronounce that name by any means, but could you, it could be a big advancement for type 2 diabetes. What sets it apart?
Yeah, and that's fair because I butchered it. I did mention orforglipron for weight management, but it's also being studied for diabetes as well. And again, it is an oral option where a lot of the alternatives besides Rybelsus are all injectable. And so that there is an advantage there for patients with more extreme needle fear or have a hard time coordinating an injection to, it is just more simple to take a pill than to do an injection. So it is a once-day medication. It is showing positive outcomes in studies, lowering A1C. And it, like I said before, it does have a higher discontinuation rate because of side effects than some of the competitors. But again, more options available is always a good thing. Depending on the pricing and adherence with the side effects, it could be another big player in the diabetes space.
Absolutely. And Kelly, for you, I imagine just having it be an oral GLP-1 could have real implications for members.
Absolutely. The easier dosing typically supports improved adherence and reduces that injection fatigue that Daniel mentioned, also mitigates any of those injection site reactions. And so as always, education will be key as members seek to transition from some of the injectable GLP-1s to oral in the future.
Wonderful. Lee, what are your thoughts here?
Just that it's essential for employers to partner with the PBM that's truly aligned with their goals, monitoring drug launches, negotiating fair rebates, and protecting plan affordability.
All right, we just received a question that I'd like to address right now. Are the oral versions going to be supplied by PBM Specialty Pharmacy, or it will be filled at the 30-90 day network? Daniel, do you have any insight to answer that
We're
question?
expecting these to be considered non-specialty brand medications. Um, it We don't know the price point just yet of this medication. It hasn't hit the market, but we expect it to be in line in competition with many of the ones that are on market today.
Thank you. All right, shifting gears a little bit here, as we think about rare diseases in this space, what comes to mind, Daniel, that employers and patients should know?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of new treatments for rare diseases coming, which from a clinical standpoint is always very exciting. These are often conditions that don't have a lot of options or need some sort of breakthrough to help patients. I'm not going to go through every single one, but there are a couple that I'd like to highlight. There is a condition called myasthenia gravis. This is a rare disease that doesn't get a whole lot of attention because it is less common but for the patients that have it, it can be very detrimental. This is a condition that basically the signals from our brain doesn't get to our muscles, and so we can lose muscle control over time, and that can become very debilitating. So the exciting news that we're expecting the approval of a medication, Uplinza. It's a new treatment available. We're expecting approval for myasthenia gravis. The medication is already on the market for some other conditions as well. The nice thing here is it only requires an infusion 2 times a year. Now, not only is it given less frequently, which helps with the patient experience, but it's also a new mechanism that expands treatment options where many current treatment options like Solaris, which is dosed every 2 weeks, or Vigart every 4 weeks, not only have a heavier treatment burden, but are also quite expensive, and having a new mechanism to treat a disease is always good. Now, being a rare disease, we are expecting this medication to probably be in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 a year. It is quite expensive, but also less expensive than some of the alternatives for this condition as well.
And Lee, since it's an infused therapy, how should employers be thinking about this cost exposure?
So a medication like this typically would fall under the medical benefit. So site of care and billing strategy do matter. Early awareness helps employers forecast potential budget impact before the meds are adopted, though.
Okay, and Kelly, what are your thoughts on patient experience here?
So the convenience of twice yearly dosing will be dramatically impactful for these patients. As Daniel mentioned, prior treatments every 2 or 4 weeks carried a much significant burden for these members. So most of the patients, upwards of 70%, were between the ages of 18 and 64 when we were looking at the clinical studies. And this dosing schedule means that there's less disruption for these patients when it comes to balancing their family, work, and their chronic care management. So we believe that this is going to improve their quality of life, as well as the potential reduction in those steroids that often these patients require. So this is definitely one to watch.
Oh, really insightful there. Just to continue the conversation about new treatments coming to market, there's a product in development to treat anaphylaxis. If approved, it would be the first non-injectable option for severe allergic reactions. Daniel, what stands out to you on this one?
Yeah, this is another new development that may not have a widespread population impact, but is extremely important for patients that need the treatments. Anaphylaxis is a life-threatening allergic reaction, often shutting down the airways, and that's a very urgent thing to treat. The standard emergency treatment option has been epinephrine or EpiPen injections. Now, aside from epinephrine injections having some on and off shortages over the years, coordinating the injection, getting the pen all set up, ready to inject while you're having difficulty breathing, that's a very stressful place to be. So Anafilm is a new one that we're expecting to be approved. It's a little strip that you just place in your mouth, and it dissolves, and you get the epinephrine to open up the airways and reverse that reaction. So much easier delivery. So it's a very meaningful innovation in those emergency situations. Now, on the downside, being so easy to administer, It is really important that patients understand storage and proper administration, because epinephrine can have some serious side effects. So making it very easy, we want to make sure that it's stored properly away from children, that sort of thing. But big advancement for patients facing that risk on a daily basis.
Really, I know we've talked a lot about, we've worked together a lot on employers and workplace readiness, employee safety beyond just the pharmacy benefit. What kind of implications could this have for them?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, those allergy injections might be in the medical benefit, things of that nature. And so we know that patients have to have their EpiPens with them in those situations. So whether it's because of a food allergy or environmental, or something such as an allergy injection on the medical side, we have the opportunity to raise awareness among employees with known allergies. Its simplified administration can make emergency kits more user-friendly and accessible. However, we need to keep that accessibility with responsibility. And so employers might consider including it in broader health and safety communications to ensure it's not mistaken for like a Listerine strip or, those breath mints or candies that are often in those same film type of containers. And so there's a real opportunity here to expand access to make it easier for use, especially if we've got children or dexterity issues. But we also want to handle it with widespread education to make sure that it is safe.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kelly. Lee, what would you add?
Just the coverage, excuse me, and formulary placement will depend on pricing relative to existing injectors. Pricing's yet to be confirmed. However, it may be around the same cost as generic EpiPen injections. So if this is true, this can mean an advancement in therapy that does not have a net cost increase, which would be beneficial for everybody. So,
Thank you. That's great.
and then just to touch on oncology before we move on a little bit. Oncology continues to be an insidious challenge to pharmacy spend that hasn't got away. Use that word because it seems like just a few years ago, the class was discussed almost always at the forefront of conversations around drug spend. But then that conversation shifted, obviously, to with the growth of inflammatory and then the explosion around GLP-1 therapy. So we do still see oncology almost always as one of the top 5 med classes, often top 3 med classes, driving an employer's annual pharmacy spend. In this trend, it's mostly driven by shifts in utilization over to newer cancer medications that are often more expensive than previous standards of care. It's worth noting, though, from a cancer care perspective, the good news is that recently the rate of death from cancer has declined about 1.5% annually. So these are amazing therapies that do work. From a pipeline perspective, we continue to see that on average, 15 to 20% of all new drug approvals in any given year are for a cancer indication. And call out too, we'll also continue to see some historically IV administered oncology agents becoming available on the market as subcutaneous formulations. This is really important to cancer patients. These are less invasive than IV infusions. For instance, they don't need to have a port placed to have these subcutaneous injections administered. They take less time to administer, and they can even enable patients to use a more convenient and less costly site of care, which also can be important for employers. We see breast cancer, ovarian cancer, certain types of lung cancer, multiple myeloma, and colorectal cancer are driving the most oncology products in the pipeline for the next year or so. And they are still costly, though. Most of the self-administered products in the more immediate oncology pipeline are estimated to have an annual wholesale acquisition cost of $200,000 to $300,000 or more. So, and just lastly, just a reminder, due to the high incidence of adverse side effects with these agents, they're often not tolerated for a sustained period of time. So you want to make sure that you're partnered with a PBM that has tight clinical oversight into the members utilizing these meds.
Very smartly. Thank you for adding that. I think that's really important for the 2026 pipeline and beyond, right? It continues to emerge and be a topic of conversation. So I appreciate your insight there. All right, let's shift a little bit more. We've covered some of the exciting therapies in the 2026 pipeline. Now let's talk about the market realities behind them. As innovation accelerates, employers face the dual challenge of access and affordability. So Lee, again, I'd like to start with you. What are you seeing in terms of payer and market dynamics as we move into 2026?
So as Daniel kind of teed up a bit ago, biosimilars are creating genuine competitive pressure in several high-cost categories. And then upcoming biosimilar launches for a few different agents, Prolia, Simponi, Eylea, Lucentis, Perjeta, and Xolair could generate meaningful savings if plans are ready to pivot. So early contracting and then clear formulary positioning will be essential to capture the value right away.
That's a great point, Lee. Biosimilars can create those cost saving opportunities, but Daniel, how should employers think about balancing these cost savings with ongoing pipeline innovation? It might drive spend back up.
Yeah. Um, like any market competition, it creates a dynamic area for driving down costs, and that can evolve over time. So it's really about timing and ensuring your vendor is using a holistic approach to the biosimilar strategy. Sometimes biosimilars can hit the market with just a small savings compared to their original product, but maybe they don't have a rebate coming in with them, or uh, others biosimilars might hit the market with a substantial upfront savings. The other thing that this competition does is it can prompt the original product to offer a significant rebate, growing that rebate much larger to stay in competition and offer a lower net cost. So by whatever means that is, it can this competition does drive down costs, and having a PBM that navigates the competition to leverage the savings for the employers is key. Now, that's the good news. And so in the specialty arena, biosimilars do offer some potential savings in that area. But on the flip side, we look at the other extreme of specialty with gene therapies. I mentioned before, there's more than 120 that the FDA is keeping watch of their development, and as many as 4 potentially being approved in the next 6 months. So gene therapies continue to be a growing area, and they are very expensive from a clinical standpoint. These are amazing treatments that are modifying the genetic sequence to really address the underlying genetic disease that has often had no options before. But the cost can be millions of dollars, which can be crippling for many employers. A lot of times I'm asked if these gene therapies are a long-term cure. Theoretically, yes. When you are changing the genetic sequence to cure a disease, it should be long-term because you fix the thing that's broken that's causing the disease. But truthfully, they haven't been out for a very long time to say that, in 10 years, what that outcome is going to be. We just don't know yet. And that's a difficult idea for plan sponsors to swallow, given the price point. I would say for plans that can't afford gene therapy, make sure your plan documents are in order, reflect your coverage intent before a case comes up. And as you do that, keep in mind that these drugs are typically given through the medical benefit to the complex treatment requirements. So make sure those plan documents are being looked at from not just the pharmacy side, but also the medical side as well.
That's great insight, Daniel, especially with the benefits of just making sure you have the right coverage in your plan documents. So, and I know Kelly can relate to that as well. So Kelly, you work directly with these employers every day. What do you feel like the biggest concern is when it comes to these type of dynamics?
I agree. I believe unpredictability is where most fear arises from. So employers want to plan, but with the number of the pipeline shifting, as we kind of discussed earlier, there's an evolving regulatory space that we're currently living in. So although we see a robust pipeline, there's only a few that are maybe rising to the top. And so they're really looking to the experts to know what will hit next. And so even payers with stop loss or gene therapy riders, they also have concerns. They want to ensure that their exclusions are appropriate. They want to know any risk that may exist within their population. And also, there becomes a timing issue of when these are approved compared to when their policies are written or accepted. And so they're very dependent upon our pharmacists to know the release timing and the impact. So most of all, they're looking for visibility. We can do that with forecasting tools, proactive alerts, strategy support, and not just be reactionary once a request comes in. So as Daniel mentioned, having a proactive plan in place to know how you will handle access and affordability is critical.
Exactly. I love that, Kelly. It's about shifting from that reactive to proactive and predictive. And that leads perfectly into our next segment. We've talked a lot about what's coming, but staying ahead of the pipeline requires more than just awareness. It's about strategy, timing, and data. Here at Rx, we built tools that help employers forecast and plan for the impact of these therapies before they even reach the market. So, Lee, again, I'd like to turn it over to you. Can you help me explain how predictive modeling is changing the way we approach the pipeline management?
Sure. So predictive modeling, it gives employers visibility into upcoming high-cost drug launches before they disrupt budgets. So it leverages clinical data and claims data to identify potential exposure. For example, how many members might be eligible for new GLP-1 indications, gene therapies, or rare disease treatments. The goal, as was mentioned, is to turn what used to be surprises into proactive planning opportunities.
The proactive piece is absolutely critical. Lee, how do you translate that data into actual strategy for these employers?
We build what we call forecast alignment models, mapping clinical trends against current plan design. So that allows us to flag areas where formulary tiers, PA criteria, or contracting terms might need early updates. So the real value is that it helps employers align strategy with their financial goals before new drugs go live.
Okay, that's a great point. Kelly, you're often the one helping these employers put this information into action. What does this look like in your practice?
Absolutely. We focus on translating analytics into communication. So, guiding HR and leadership teams on how to discuss these changes internally is really important. Knowing the risk within the population is a game changer. So, the emphasis is always going to be on access and affordability, making sure members get the right care while controlling any unnecessary spend.
That's what I love about Truex. I agree with you. It's working together to help make this into action. So thank you for always being a good partner with us, Kelly, and helping us be able to have these conversations. We don't want to just share data, it's actionable intelligence. So, Daniel, what's one example of how predictive insights have really made a difference for a client?
Yeah, we had one client comes to mind. We identified that population had a high risk of moving towards higher than average GLP-1 utilization just because we saw a high portion of the diabetes patients that hadn't yet started GLP-1s, but certainly would be likely to qualify. So that insight led the client to implement our diabetes education management program that helps patients reach diabetes control by optimizing the medications and leveraging lifestyle modifications that you know simply understanding your medications and getting the most out of them and coupling that with um, small steps towards lifestyle changes can go a long way in controlling diabetes. Um, when that happens, patients get healthier, can avoid a lot of unnecessary treatment costs when conditions like diabetes are well controlled, and you can do that without limiting access to treatments for the members who actually do need them. One patient comes to mind with that client that they started the program and said their doctor was about to prescribe a GLP-1, and it turns out they were really never taught how to dose their insulin properly. They had an insulin pen that they weren't using right. So it wasn't that they needed a new medication; they just needed to know how to use their current medication properly. And we were able to get their A1C under control without adding more medication, just through education and optimizing what they already had at their fingertips.
I know you have a million more examples of that, Daniel and Lee, and probably Kelly too. So it really shows the power of strategy for foresight working together. And as we head into 2026, that kind of proactive planning will be essential for every employer watching this session. This really has been a great discussion. Thank you for sharing your insights. I'd love to open it now and hear what's on the audience's mind. What I'm going to do now is bring in some of the questions for the remainder of time that have come in from the audience. So feel free to keep them coming. One question, Daniel or Lee, are all Truex groups being provided with predictive modeling services, or how are these predictions being communicated to the groups?
So we work with our partners on what is best for them based on their membership, size of the group, consultant partners, but we're available to help in any way that they see fit and that's best for them.
The other piece to that is that we're, like the client that I gave the example of, when we have clients that have outliers, sets of populations, a lot of times those are the early keys to say, we're going to see some trends here. We may not be able to predict that someone is going to be born with a genetic disorder that needs a gene therapy. We don't have the ability to predict everything, but we can see population-based trends that show, yeah, this has a high prevalence of diabetes. So you are going to benefit by optimizing therapy now, so you don't have to pay for the complications and adding more medications down the road. Same thing, I think of mental health. When we see a client that has a higher than average mental health set of medications, we can work with them with our genomics program, or talk about their strategies, because a lot of times those aren't creeping up to the top of the spend, but it is very relevant for taking care of the population. So identifying those outliers help us to see where the treatment options might need to be enhanced, and what services, whether it's from Rx or otherwise, that they might need to consider.
And Jenny, I'll jump in real quick. One thing to keep in mind when we talk about the rare and orphan conditions is oftentimes there's a genetic link. And so if you already know of a diagnosis within your population, oftentimes, we can take a look and say, are there other family members? Are they of childbearing age? And so when you think about that predictive modeling, it's about using the tools at your fingertips. And so to Daniel and Lee's points, there's no crystal ball. I don't think anybody can guarantee, what that utilization is going to be. However, we can use our insights and our knowledge to say, this is what we're seeing at the population at large. This is what we're seeing within your population, and then kind of give some commentary around the genetic links and what we should be considering for your population.
That's great, Kelly. Thank you for that insight. Lee, there is a question that came in. What pipeline trend are we not talking about? I know you already hit on oncology. I just wanted to turn it over to you to kind of touch on that a little bit more.
Sure. One that comes to mind would be Alzheimer's disease. It was talked about prevalently, and then it kind of went away, but there just some high-level thoughts. There are 2 studies currently underway examining the utility of oral semaglutide in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Depending on when the studies conclude and submission occurs, an FDA decision is possible by end of year 2026. And then studies also continue that are analyzing the effectiveness of injectable Ozempic in treating Alzheimer's disease. So both the oral and injectable forms of semaglutide are being looked at. Leqembi, subcutaneous, it's a self-administered formulation of the original IV administered agent. Currently, this formulation is only approved for maintenance therapy for patients who have finished 18 months of IV therapy, but 2026 could see the approval of SQ formulation of Leqembi for treatment initiation, which would bypass IV therapy completely. This just goes back to the idea of it improves ease of access and at-home administration for this patient population. And then there's a novel antipsychotic that was approved for schizophrenia at the end of 2024, Cobenfy. It's currently being evaluated for Alzheimer's disease psychosis. This is important because no other drug is approved for this specific use, and it's an area of unmet need. If anyone has a family member or an elderly parent or whatnot that's gone through this, you know the limitations with what's currently out there to help. Traditional antipsychotic agents are what are usually leaned upon, but they have a box warning for increased mortality in elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis. So if this product were to gain this approval, it could be very impactful to this patient population. So
that's great, Lee. A next question is, and I know there's a ton of questions around the regulatory landscape, of course. How could TrumpRx impact rebate revenue and out-of-pocket spending? Daniel, I'd love your insight there.
Yeah, we are following this. I can't say that we have any behind the scenes view, but it's definitely an evolving topic. Um, what seems to be coming, from what we can tell thus far, is potentially a direct to consumer option, which is interesting. Even let's just throw out some numbers. Let's say it's $150, $200 a month. Even at those prices, might be a lot cheaper than the total cost through traditional avenues, but still can be a bit of a cost barrier for a lot of Americans. So it'll be interesting to see if that pathway does come forward. Will there be a shift towards people wanting to just bypass insurance, not get credit towards their deductible, probably pay more than what their copay would be? I don't know. We'll see. But if that does start to happen and we have fewer GLP-1s going through the plan, obviously there aren't going to be rebates for medications that aren't filled through the plan. So for the net cost aspect, the access to the medications elsewhere is going to reduce rebate return, which isn't necessarily something to chase, but it is a factor and a good thing that the audience member pointed out that could shift the rebate intake for clients as well.
Thank you, Daniel.
And Jenny, before you go, we'd like to just a reminder about True Rx Health Strategists. We've been working to lower costs for employers and their patients since our inception. We continue to seek every opportunity to support employers and patients in managing healthcare costs, which continue to rise. But one of the benefits, we like to make sure we're not introducing any clinical risk when we're bypassing any claims monitoring that could occur when things are filled through the benefit. So
great insight. Thank you, Lee. Another question we have is if GLP-1s turn out to reduce dementia rates, which I know you kind of touched on, Lee, cancer mortality rates, how does that affect the cost benefit overall math? Lee, can you touch on that one, and Daniel as well?
You want to start, Daniel? Then I'll.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. When we look at the conditions that GLP-1s are used for today, we know that not treating diabetes and not managing it well is going to lead to high costs, and as well as a lot of terrible outcomes from a clinical standpoint. We look at even Wegovy approved for MASH. Wegovy sitting around at $1,000, $1,200. The only other treatment for that condition is 4 times the cost. So, well, that's an easy comparison, right? If they both have the same types of outcomes, well, one is obviously going to be much more affordable. But when we move the thought towards dementia, Alzheimer's, and even prolonging survival with cancer, it's a different equation altogether, right? We're not looking at cost avoidance from not treating the condition, because not treating those conditions is detrimental. It's morbidity that we're looking at. GLP-1s probably aren't going to replace any cancer treatments, but they might be an adjunct if they're shown to be beneficial. And I think the onus is on the manufacturers to demonstrate exactly where and to what extent is that clinical benefit. Is it all cancers? There's some preliminary studies looking at benefit in prolonging survival with colon cancer. Does that also apply to breast cancer? These questions still need to be answered through those clinical trials. But when we look at the cost benefit, it's we're talking about prolonging survival, and that's not as simple as comparing this costs $1,000, this costs $4,000, and it's just a whole different equation. When we talk about dementia, we're also we have mental health parity factors to consider as well. That often isn't dementia isn't a predominant condition in the self-insured space, but it does come up some. And so we want to make sure that we're taking the mental health parity aspect into it as well.
Lee, before you jump in, I'm going to build on what Daniel just said. And I think really finding that place in therapy, when is the best time for these therapies to start. When I hear of some of these diseases such as cancer and Alzheimer's, what comes to my mind is often, as we talked about today, preventative and proactive. And so we know that people that have weight management issues may be more likely to experience some cancer rates or other health conditions. And we've talked for many years before GLP-1s were in the headlines, just a 5% weight reduction can really help our chronic disease management. And so I think as we're considering, cost avoidance, cost benefit, focusing on when is the best effective time for patients to be on these drugs, it may be more in the preventative and proactive space, as opposed to when Daniel was speaking, if somebody's pretty far along in their cancer staging, I don't necessarily know if we're going to cure cancer with it. So those cost benefit analyses are going to be a little bit more challenging than if we introduce them sooner in someone's healthcare journey. And so these are all things that we need to be considering and thinking about, especially as the headlines are coming forth, is really looking at what is it most effective for patients.
Lee, anything you'd add here?
Just from the standpoint that we've had a ton of questions come in around GLP-1s, we've spent a lot of time talking about GLP-1s today. Even stepping back just to consider and touch on how remarkable it is that GLP-1s have moved really beyond a drug class to become almost like a cultural phenomenon, part of the fabric of our society. There's approximately 14% of all US households currently have someone utilizing a GLP-1, and an additional 24% on top of that would consider starting one if affordability and access were streamlined. So these agents are affecting the way that people eat and shop and move and perceive themselves and make lifestyle decisions. It's really interesting how some even non-healthcare industries are viewing GLP-1s as a significant disruptor, and how companies are using data around the therapy to alter their strategies. For instance, the grocery industry, they see grocery spend decline up to 8% in households where the GLP-1 utilizer is the primary food purchaser. They've seen a shift in what type of food is being bought, away from the calorie-dense, convenience-driven items toward more nutrient-rich options. The retail industry, they know spend on apparel rises 4 to 5% about 6 months after GLP-1 treatment begins. The exercise industry, they know that purchases of gym memberships and equipment spike really early on in GLP-1 treatment. And then leisure travel, there's been a boom in fitness retreats, wellness-oriented vacations. Even the airline industry, I've seen articles that mention internal planning around potentially needing to budget for less fuel as passengers nationwide reduce weight. That's a wide variety of industries in which a drug class, a medication class, is altering overall strategies. And still, we could underestimate how appetite suppression is going to impact our national and even global economies. Think back to 2007, 2008, 2009, with the launch and then massive uptake of like the iPhone and other smartphones. Very few individuals at that time could have predicted that a whole multi-billion-dollar industry would spring up around something called app-based ride sharing. So our hope is, as an employer, you have a PBM partner that considers how GLP-1 therapy is impacting your members' overall lived experience, I guess you could say, beyond just adjudicating your GLP-1 claims. We can get bogged down in the step therapy and the PA, but your partner should look at your membership holistically when it comes to these agents and otherwise, and support them to lead happier, healthier, more productive, and fulfilling lives. So.
I love that, Lee. I think you don't have to be in pharmacy benefits to understand exactly what you mean and how quickly that can affect the entire world around us. It has been astronomical in how we live every single day in terms of pharmacy benefits, but as people in our homes and seeing interactions with our friends and family, it has absolutely changed kind of how we live every single day. So thank you for bringing that viewpoint into it. Daniel, anything you'd add? Otherwise, I can move on to our next question.
No, it's a fascinating point. How it's really, as Lee mentioned, shifting our culture, and if that means, I just wonder, in 20, 30 years, what is that trajectory of American health going to look like among the other industries that you mentioned. It's just a fascinating thing to think about.
And related to points Daniel and Kelly made around like the utility, but not everything is known yet.
Right.
Also the challenges that they can hold. I read it was a case review series around oncology PET scans in patients actively taking GLP-1s. In short, these scans, the patient is injected with an IV radio tracer. So researchers, they observed several abnormal patterns of the uptake of that radio tracer in folks taking GLP-1s. So that's problematic. Abnormal patterns increase risk of misinterpretation of the results. So that's leading to unnecessary spend on follow-up tests, potentially false positives, incorrect cancer staging, and delays in treatment. So I guess the take home, it just stuck out to me that phenomenon will continue to be studied, but we could see recommendations come out where GLP-1 therapy needs to be stopped for a certain period of time prior to these and other imaging studies. Similar to how currently, if you go to the gastroenterologist for an endoscopy or a colonoscopy, they'll recommend you stop oral GLP-1 therapy 1 to 2 days prior to that procedure and up to 7 days prior for injectable therapy.
And Lee, you brought up a good point earlier or maybe it's, with the Trump Rx or direct to patient, direct to consumer. We know for GLP-1s, Costco, Walmart, GoodRx, I mean, you name it, and it seems like there's a host of ways that patients may be getting a GLP-1, even if it's not through their traditional benefit plan. And so, if providers were previously relying on what they were seeing in an electronic health record, it's so important for us to be educating patients that when they go see their providers, they're disclosing all medications, supplements, over-the-counters, now direct-to-patient avenues, because we don't want, for someone to go in for a PET scan for cancer and the provider just not have awareness because it's not on their drug list. And that's part of what makes it vital to understanding entirely what's going on with the patient and having complete records.
So insightful, Kelly. I completely agree. And I think you've heard from all of us, listening in, that TrueRx, we're thinking about the whole picture, FPS as well, not just what's right in front of us, but how this affects us on a daily basis and the employers that we work with and the patients that we serve. So going into, I think, our probably last question that we'll be able to get to, what is TrueRx doing around biosimilars with Stelara? Daniel, can you start off with that?
Yeah, Stelara, a lot like Humira, it evolved over time, and more and more biosimilars coming to market. We're always evaluating what those options are. We want to make sure that we're offering low net cost options, and when you consider the cost of Stelara versus the cost of some of these biosimilars, it's several factor savings. So to be able to offer formulary strategies that offer those biosimilars and allowing patients to convert rather than simply chasing a rebate that isn't going to make up for the cost difference, that kind of strategy is really important to be looking out for the client. And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier with biosimilars in general, that it is something that evolves. The very first biosimilar might not offer net savings. Maybe it does, but then another one comes to market, and we have to look at that landscape to make sure that we continue to offer best pricing options, because these are remarkable drugs. And if we can provide them to patients to see the clinical outcomes that they produce, but controlling costs in doing so, that is what we want to do with pharmacy benefits.
Thank you, Daniel. We actually just had another question come in. So Kelly, can doctors use compounding pharmacies? We have an employee using compound pharmacy for weight loss at a price of $200. Obviously, we're going right back to GLP-1, so this is absolutely a hot topic.
Yes, and I will say the FDA had removed these medications from their drug shortage list, and so many had ceased compounding, had seen the headlines regarding that. But we do still today see compounding, and how they're working through those updated channel communications is through personalized dosing. And so sometimes that may be micro dosing, sometimes that might be adding vitamins. And so we are still seeing compounding in the market. As we're starting to see these direct prices come down, as we start to see patients concerned about safety, knowing where it was compounded, how it was compounded, and coverage expansion, I don't know if compounding will still be as hot of a topic as people were just trying to get access and affordability previously. We do still caution compounding to ensure that it is safe, you know what you're getting, and that it's effective. Daniel and I and Lee were kind of joking recently, if you're getting a customized compound of GLP-1, but every single patient that provider is seeing is approving it to have vitamin B added to it, I'm not really sure it's customized. So I would say buyer beware. We should use a common sense approach and keep attuned with what's going on in the market.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about a lot of moving pieces when it comes to pipeline, the political landscape. And this is another area that is still evolving. The final answer of will compounding be allowed to continue the way it has been over the last couple of years? There's battles between manufacturers and large compounding entities of whether or not that should be allowed. And it seems to go one way for a while and then another, and it just has not been settled. But to Kelly's point, there are a lot of compounding options out there today. Will that continue to be in place? Time will tell.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly and Daniel. If your question wasn't answered today, we will absolutely follow up with a direct response to you. So just thank you, everybody, for your engagement during the question and answer session. Just to close, at Rx, I just wanted to let you know we're here to be your health strategists and navigate costs and health benefits with solutions that put patients first. A big thank you to Daniel, Lee, and Kelly for lending your expertise today. And to you, thank you all for joining us. We hope these insights help you plan for what's next. The webinar recording will be posted on our website soon, and you can find more details on the topic on TrueRx's blog. If you'd like to continue the conversation or learn more about our health strategists at TrueRx and directly contacting Kelly at FPS to support our organization, please reach out and we'd love to connect. On behalf of all of us at TrueRx and FPS, thank you for being part of True Conversations, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.